You're still watching Morning at NTV. I'm Arnold Sagawa. Welcome back. It's only 21 minutes to 8 o'clock. Let's have some reaction to yesterday's president's speech. That's, of course, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Going forward, what were some of the highlights and maybe reaction-wise, many people looking forward to a lifting of partial bits of the lockdown. To just help us get a more broader understanding of this particular reaction and further, we're joined by the Deputy Head of Mission to China, Ambassador Henry Maiga. Mr. Maiga, many thanks for making time to speak to us.
Thank you very much for inviting me this morning.
Yes, let's maybe start it off at the beginning. What did you make of? There's been many addresses by the head of state. What did you make of this particular one in light of partial liftings and what this actually means for the ordinary folk who wakes up and sells newspapers?
Absolutely. Of course, as the public knows, the president has been, I think this is the 15th address that he has made ever since the country went into the lockdown mode. And there has been a lot of, I believe, planning on the part of government. And of course, by the time the president takes a decision, in as far as either easing completely or even the bits which have been coming through in terms of easing the lockdown, that is contingent upon the briefs that he gets, the professional advice that he gets from the medical people. Of course, there is also intelligence, and so the point which I'm trying to raise here is that the president actually, by the time he comes out with the bits of the easing of the lockdown, he premises those decisions on what information he has received from the various handlers of the information that he gets in as far as this matter is concerned. Yeah. But of course, your point, I mean, the question that you're asking is extremely important. How is it really affecting the ordinary person, as you say? I mean, in a sense, all of us are ordinary anyway, because all of us are affected. Whether you're a low person or a high person and so on and so forth, all of us are affected by these things which are happening. But of course, I just want to believe that there is a lot of careful planning in as far as this thing is concerned, because if by just a stroke of a word, you say, okay, there's now complete opening up or easing the lockdown, that, in my view, has to be done very carefully, because if you don't, then we can probably see a resurgence or even the increase in numbers of COVID-19 cases. If we take ourselves out of this country and look at the examples of countries which have eased, I mean, like in China, I was reading yesterday about one of the provinces where, yes, that easing of the lockdown, a province called not Liaoning, it's called Heilongjiang. And so they had eased the lockdown in that province, but immediately they eased the lockdown. There was a second wave kind of, and so they had to lock down again. And then that doesn't show good planning. Good planning, in my view, would mean that yes, we must ease, and the president has actually made a point in the past by saying that the situation in which we are is abnormal, and therefore many things which are painful to us as citizens of this country are done so that we protect ourselves against rising numbers of COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. But this then, again, I want us to have a very broad kind of a conversation on this. And the reason why I put that in light is because it was just last week when someone from Internal Affairs alluded to a very interesting point. And he mentioned that, I'm paraphrasing here, but he mentions the fact that the cases that we're now seeing in Uganda are, in a way, a trickle-down effect to our neighbors and how they've handled the situation, how they've handled the pandemic. Take, for instance, Rwanda has been very, very tough. You know, they've closed down, they've been very tough, tight curfew, same as us. Just across the board in Tanzania, it's not maybe the same case. You know, in Kenya, it was also the same case. It's not also very tight. So as a result, South Sudan, 400 and plus, so many cases that we've seen in the past week, Elegu. So in all of this, the sacrifices that we're making as Ugandans, is it fair to take it in sort of isolation without the EAC coming to the table and putting pieces to the table too?
Absolutely. I agree with you. But of course, you remember that a couple of weeks ago, there were efforts between the various heads of state of the East African region to put together this thing so that there is that uniform response to the pandemic. And of course, we are not privy to what the discussions were and what the details were in those, arising from those discussions. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, there was this attempt. And I want to believe that probably some points were agreed on in as far as fighting the pandemic is concerned. Yes, of course, a lot of control in Rwanda, less than that high level control in Tanzania. In Kenya, yes, some little bit of control in as far as fighting the pandemic is concerned. Southern Sudan, I don't know. I'm not really so much aware of exactly what has been happening in that country. But in Uganda, of course, it has been very tough. Lockdown, airports closed, borders closed,
curfew,
no public transport, curfew, and all these things probably, in my view, I want to believe that have saved us a lot.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about it.
We're on the same page.
Now, where these kinds of controls, for instance, in Tanzania, let's be blunt about what has been happening in Tanzania, because there hasn't been as much control of whether you talk about public transport or curfews and all these kinds of things. The level of control in Uganda has been much more than what it has been in Tanzania. And of course, you've been hearing from there what has been happening in terms of the spike in the numbers and the cases of those who are affected. In Kenya, the same story, because the numbers are big. Rwanda is a much smaller country than ourselves, but of course they've had larger numbers of people getting affected. I just want to believe that the government, the Yoweri Museveni administration, definitely took the steps they did to save the country, both in terms of lives that probably would have been lost or something like that, or even increase in the infections. But at the same time, also because there is a cost. There is a cost in as far as treatment is concerned. Because if you take the case of testing, just testing, take away accommodation, take away the rest of the things which are consume money in as far as fighting the pandemic is concerned. Just testing whether somebody has COVID-19 or not is $65. That's quite a lot of money. And I was checking the figures the other day. Quite substantial numbers of people have been tested for the corona virus. And those numbers have actually been soaring. And I want to believe that the steps that were taken by the Yoweri Museveni administration, whether you're talking about the curfew, whether you're talking about banning public transport and all these kinds of things, have actually protected us, in my view, more than it has been in the rest of the region.
The running fact is no one ever made money when they were dead. Maybe Michael Jackson, and he also can't spend it. But the most important thing is staying alive. So I'm with you there. Let's talk about China. There's been a call from many African governments to, we have a lot of debt. I mean, Angola alone is sitting on $25 billion worth of Chinese debt. You're the deputy head of mission to China. Is this a conversation as African governments that is on the table to reconsider some of our loans, some of our facilities that we've taken out with the Sino-Africa programs that we've seen in the past?
Well, of course, probably taking you back, what happened in the last meeting, which was held, it's called the FOCAC, that brought together African heads of state and the leadership of China. Of course, China agreed in principle that landlocked countries and which are least developed would be forgiven the debt. As far as that suggestion was, that proposal was made. I don't know definitely how far that has gone. But of course, the Yoweri Museveni administration, as you and I know, has said, look, it is time actually to consider this thing as something that is extremely important. That countries are forgiven the huge debts, and Uganda has suggested that, as you know. Whether it is still a suggestion.
But
They haven't been as responses as such
Ambassador,
from either China or even the Western world.
Let me just stop you there for just a bit. For someone like me who's never sat in a car with a flag and never been a diplomat, when such a statement is agreed in principle, is there a timeline to when it's enforced? I'm taking you back to the FOCAC meeting, where, let's say, President Xi agrees with maybe 50 African heads of state that, guys, landlocked countries, we're looking at forgiving your debt. Is this agreed in principle, and you say that maybe in 3 years this will be written off? The same way there was in the year 2000, the highly poorly indebted countries, the World Bank, and they wrote off much of our debts. Is this agreed, and is it tangible in a particular timeline, or is it a sort of a flag that is a carrot that is dangled in front of us as Africans?
Well, whether we call it a carrot or not, in my view, it was a pronouncement that was made by the government of China, and for that I think we must be very thankful, because I think China has been very proactive in as far as these matters are concerned of forgiving the least developed countries of their debts. That was pronounced, yes, last year by the Chinese side, and as to whether this is going to happen in just the space of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, that time frame was not given. But the fact of the matter is that China came out very openly to say that yes, this kind of forgiveness is going to be made, so that countries can start from a clear slate in as far as developing themselves is concerned. That was a pronouncement that was made. As to whether this is going to take a short time or is going to be done in the short term or long term, that one I definitely can't. I'm afraid I don't have any information as far as. But it was a very good pronouncement in my view, because the burden of debt on the African countries really weighs so much on them, and making advancements in terms of growth, development, and so on becomes very difficult if these debts are not tackled the way, for instance, the Chinese have given. And they have been very good partners of Africa, and especially Uganda. Right now, as we speak, you and I know that China is the biggest provider of foreign direct investment in this country. And the story is the same in many other African countries. So, debt, yes. I think the proposal from the Yoweri Museveni administration and the rest of the African countries is really not misplaced. It's a very good idea that this suggestion is actually looked at with not with jaundiced eyes, but really consider it so that something can be done in that direction.
If we continue on this trajectory, I might end up taking you on the Silk Road and the One Road, One Belt initiative, and we might end up there. But let's just bring it back to COVID. Yes, there's African governments have come out and said, it's time that we considered just giving us a clean slate, especially in this pandemic. Give me a sense of the reaction of the China government, the Beijing, vis-a-vis a country like Uganda, away from, let's say, FDI, which is mostly, I would argue, driven by the private sector. How is Beijing reacting towards aiding African countries like governments like Uganda? And I say this in light of Jack Ma, Alibaba's founder, who has made it almost a personal initiative to make sure he sends cargo planes across Africa, even the U.S., they're sending out PPE, sending out face masks. This is all almost pro bono. God knows he's a billionaire. He doesn't have to do it. Jeff Bezos is not doing it. Give me a sense of what Beijing is doing in reaction to COVID-19.
No, the Chinese authorities have been, I think, have been very proactive in as far as fighting the pandemic is concerned. But of course, the argument starts from the fact that the pandemic came from there, specifically from the province of Hubei, whose capital is Wuhan. Most Ugandans, of course, know the word.
We all
Wuhan,
know Wuhan,
much more than Hubei. Hubei is the province, and then Wuhan is the capital, and that's where the problem came. And as far as Ugandans know, China has actually controlled the pandemic, because for a string of quite a number of days, there hasn't been any death, although some infections come through. But most of the infections at the moment in China actually come from it's what we actually refer to as imported cases. They come from abroad. new arrivals from other countries and so on. Many of the new infections are actually coming from abroad. Now, coming to your question, that what has China done in as far as helping African countries? I mean, China, for instance, has sent out technical teams, medical professionals for that matter, to various African countries. Of course, here we have a hospital which was funded by the Chinese, and they've been giving quite substantial amounts of assistance through that hospital, and also to technical advice to most of these African countries, of course, including Uganda. And of course, this technical assistance has not come without even funding, because these are some of the things which China has been doing. And in as far as I'm concerned, I think China has really played its role in as far as fighting the pandemic is concerned. And yeah, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, China is where this problem began. And so they definitely had quite better experience in fighting the pandemic is concerned than the rest of, more than the rest of the global countries. And so that technical assistance, in terms of medical professionals, you can talk about equipment, you can talk about medicines, you can talk about these things have come to Africa, especially through the African Union, and then redistributed throughout the African continent. And that's how, in my view, China has played its role, and it's continued to play it. And I believe it's well-meaning, and it's going to take us through the pandemic, and then eventually all of us are going to celebrate and say, yes, China, great friends of ours.
Let's just shift gear and talk about the air travel. Now, restrictions across the continent from Kenya to South Africa, definitely air travel is on lockdown as we speak. Bearing that in mind, how soon do you see the region, I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa now quite broadly, returning to maybe positive growth, given the fact that I want to maybe now to wear an economics hat, given the fact that, let's face it, FDI is going to be muted. We're going to see some capital flight from our stock markets. How soon do you see the dust settling? A year and a half?
Well, people have been talking about 2 years for this mess to completely subside. So that is a substantial amount of time. And but of course, you talked about also the air business. I saw the other day Kenya Airways trying to plan for reopening.
I mean, Lufthansa in Germany just got a $9.8 billion bailout from the government.
But of course, Germany is a very rich country.
But who knew that
it becomes very difficult for you to compare it with Uganda or any other African country. And most of these airlines, yes, they have them. You have South African Airlines, you have Kenya Airlines, you have Rwanda Air and all these kinds of things. But even before the pandemic came, they were limping. Actually, they were making losses, let's be blunt, in as far as this matter is concerned. So it's going to be very difficult, for, in my view, for African Airlines. Yes, they will resume, and they mean well, because it is a representation of national pride and all these kinds of things. And we must have them, there's no doubt about it, and I'm happy that Uganda government actually restarted the Uganda Airlines. And yes, they are going to restart, and I believe pretty soon, probably somewhere end of July or August or September, something like that. But of course, there will be lots of pain. Losses are already being made. I'm a member of the Emirates airline, because I fly by Emirates, and I know that they've been sending me messages as a member, and you can see they're also grappling with the same problem, that they have made losses. In fact, they have laid off workers. And so these are some of the consequences of this pandemic. And the other day I only went to the office in Kamochi, and they had actually locked. I mean, it was closed. Yeah. And so operations have gone down, and losses are being made, yes, but it will take a bit of time before these things begin to work like the situation was when it was normal.
On the political spectrum, yet again, it's you know, there's an old saying that when it rains, it pours. On one arm, China is grappling with the pandemic. Well, I think they've passed the peak. Now maybe it's coming down. And on the other hand, Hong Kong is becoming, God knows, something else. The riots are back. there's been talk from the premier that maybe Beijing used the guise of the COVID-19 pandemic to make a move and pass in some laws. Tell me, where does Uganda stand on the whole Taiwan, Hong Kong, Beijing triangle?
Absolutely. Actually, the South African Union and Uganda, of course, subscribes to the position of the AU that China and all those regions that you've mentioned, which are actually part of China, that negotiations are the middle ground that should be pursued.
That already sounds like you've passed your judgment if you say that Taiwan is already a part of China.
Absolutely, because when you talk about, for instance, Hong Kong, it is part of China. There is no doubt about it. Taiwan, a little bit interesting.
Taiwan argues it's a sovereign.
Yeah, it is. Well, they consider themselves so, but of course, the fact of the matter is it's one of the regions of China. And negotiations. Is
that our position? As
the point of emphasis, AU, and as I said, Uganda, of course, subscribes to the AU. The position is that there should be negotiations between China and the rest of those, especially Taiwan. But when it comes to Hong Kong, of course, that's part of China, as you know. But of course, two systems. That the Hong Kongers have actually got their own political system that emphasizes capitalism and all these kinds of things, the way it used to be when the British were still in control of that region. But it's in fact, as a matter of fact, the Congress is now sitting in China. That's the Parliament of China. And Hong Kong has representatives in the Congress.
Yes,
so
yes.
They are part and parcel of China, although it gets two systems. Like you would have a different kind of political system in China where the Communist Party does all
with the Carrie Lam.
And
but now Hong Kong's biggest problem is the fact that Beijing actually does get to choose the premier, who actually does represent the whole of Hong Kong and is ultimately the janitor, the head, the jury, everything, the judge. And if I am to use the reasoning of the African Union and why Morocco was kicked out is because Morocco had an issue with present-day Sahel, Mauritania, and these guys were asking for their sovereignty, same way as Hong Kong or even Taiwan would be asking for their sovereignty. And if we're to use AU's rationale here, wouldn't that be double standards? If Morocco was shunned for doing that particular move on the Sahel, yet China is arguably doing the same thing to Taiwan, wouldn't that be double standards?
No, I don't see any double standards in that because, of course, the Sahel region is still a dicey issue, and as far as the issue is concerned. But Hong Kong insists to be, because there was an agreement actually between the British and the Chinese that yes, you keep Hong Kong for so many years, and then after those, call it 100 years, this place would revert to China, which they did. So I am not very privy to the situation in Sahel. I don't know whether they have that kind of agreement. As to say that Sahel probably has an agreement with Morocco or the Moroccan monarch that after such and such a time they would revert back to Morocco. But it was very clear for Hong Kong. So I don't want to call it double standards because there was an agreement that was signed between the Chinese and the British that after 100 years, 99 point something, years, that Hong Kong would revert to China. And it so happened, and I was watching one of the clips, the representative of the British in Hong Kong, once it was reverting to China, he even cried when that place was being handed over to China. But there was that agreement. That's the point of emphasis. So I don't see really double standards. And once there is an agreement, the signatories to that agreement must respect its contents.
Many Ugandans are still in China. I mean, China is the global supply chain god of sorts. All our supply chains, Foxconn, even Apple products are made in China, only assembled somewhere else. But Ugandans are still in parts of China. I mean, many countries have repatriated their people. Now, the president has touched on this in his so many addresses in the past, but there hasn't been a concrete plan when it comes to repatriation. Is there something coming from the mission?
Well, this doesn't actually necessarily have to come from the mission because the mission is supposed to facilitate what the government position is. And the government position is at the moment that there are plans to, I think, repatriate something like over 2,000 Ugandans who are stuck all over the place, all over the world. And China is of course, one of those places where Ugandans are stuck. And that pronouncement was made recently by the government, and I want to believe that preparations have actually begun for these people to be repatriated. So the commitment by the government, by the Yoweri Museveni administration, to repatriate Ugandans who are stranded abroad is in my view, 100% total. And there will be this repatriation in good time, because that is the position of government.
But is this actionable? Again, when you hear something of this sort, we do have a plan to put this in order. Is there a time frame to this? Because as early as January, as early as February, there were calls from some Ugandan, especially students in Wuhan, which I'm very sure you've actually seen. This was going around from February 2020. We're now in June, and all we heard were there were plans, and up to now there are plans. Yet a supplementary budget that was passed in the parliament got a stamp. That was fast, but people being repatriated, not people, but Ugandans being repatriated, it's still in the works.
Yeah, absolutely, it's still in the works. A plan is a plan, and until it is actualized.
Making us the only East African country that hasn't repatriated its people.
Well, the other day a few of them, of course, came, so I don't want to believe that we haven't repatriated anybody. But whichever direction the government takes, the Yoweri Museveni administration takes, I think it will be in the interest of every Ugandan, and I want to believe that this plan is going to be actualized as time passes, because it takes, we call it a plan, yes. It takes money. Yeah, it takes money, and you have to be careful, not only for the chartered flights to bring them, as you know, most of the airlines are actually not functioning at the moment, so you must charter flights, and worldwide, and so that means actually a cost. And even besides that, I mean, you have to ensure that these people do not bring a new wave of infections. Yeah, that also has to be planned for, and once they arrive here, if you call it 2,000 something, who were supposed to be repatriated, because the numbers were being talked about the other day. That also would ensure that when they come, they get quarantined for 14 days, either in their own homes, which is very difficult. Which is very difficult because control now becomes difficult, and supervision definitely would be another issue.
As was the argument before, that would be on your own cost. The hardest bit is getting the people here. You know, chartering the plane and getting the people here. It's just something that has lagged for such a long time, and you can understand if you're a parent yourself. If you've got a son, you've got a daughter, they're in Wuhan, they've been sending you videos, and they're just waiting. You know, flights have gone up. Yes, charter a plane, but it's just lagging.
Yeah, I don't want to call it to refer to it as something that is lagging in my view, because as I've said, it means cost, and Ugandans are scattered all over the place. I mean, if, for instance, in the U.S., in the conurbation around New York, Washington, Boston, and so on and so forth, you have almost 100,000 Ugandans. But not all of them, of course, are for repatriation, because we are talking about something like over 2,000 Ugandans across the globe that are supposed to be repatriated. So you have to make sure that you collect all those fellows in one place, and then organize them, then they pay for the tickets, then, and you know, even identify which flights to carry them home and all these kinds. So it's not something that you're going to bump into. It's something that you must plan. And I would rather that it takes a little bit of time rather than hurry and then make a mistake. Yeah.
Ambassador, Deputy Head of Mission to China, Henry Maiga, many thanks for making time to speak to us. Always great to just pick your brain and get a global understanding of some of these technicalities. He's still with us. We'll be coming back to him in just a few. Let's take you to the streets right now. Stephen Bide joins us for a quick reaction to the President's address yesterday.
Hi. Thank you for watching Morning at NTV. Some of these people you see walking from Namungona, Nansana, Wakiso, heading towards the city center. A day after tomorrow, that is Thursday, many of these people will be able maybe to board taxis, taking them towards the Kampala city to make to make some money out of their businesses, whatever they are doing. But I'm going to be speaking to some of these people these are found here at Namungona. Their reaction to the president's speech, who was saying that yes, this public means have to resume, and so many other guidelines and directives he was able to give yesterday. But let me begin with this gentleman. Good morning to you.
Morning, how are you?
I'm okay. What's your name?
I'm Reuben Semaganda.
What did you pick from the president's speech? He made so many pronouncements, but what came out for you that you think it was a big highlight for you?
Thank you for that question. When we talk about public transport resuming back, the president was clear on that they will resume on 4th. But according to what I've heard, the KCCA and the Minister of Kampala, they are still arranging for the cars and their routes, which means that the day is going to be resumed, but the taxis are not going to begin, or the buses, because they are saying that in order that taxi to come back on the road, it has to be directed by the KCCA. So that means that they are not going to resume immediately, because they have to wait for the rules and regulations of Ministry of Works and Transport. And there are many things they are demanding from the taxi drivers and the owners. That means that the public transport is not going to begin immediately, effectively. That means that we are going to continue with our walking until the roads will be regulated, that this taxi must walk from here to this end, and this one must go from here to this end. And they are asking for many things from the drivers and the owners of the cars, because they are talking about if you are going to register for your car, you have to bring the card for the vehicle. And are
you a taxi driver?
I'm not. But I'm a concerned citizen.
A concerned citizen. I know a presidential directive supersedes any other directive. Maybe in this case it also supersedes directives. But for now, you as a concerned citizen, a passenger, I also want to understand, because the taxi touts are saying the fares will have to double. How will this affect you as a concerned citizen?
It will affect me, because to move from Namungona to the town, I've been using 1,000. When it goes to 2,000, it will affect me, because even business now are locked. We are not working. Although some of us who are dealing, because for me I'm a businessman, who is dealing with a business, although we are allowed to open these sites, but no customers, which means that even things which we buy from town, the shops are closed. That means that it is going to affect us very much, that when you are going to town to buy things you want, they are not, you are going to double that transport, okay, which is not.
Okay, let me ask someone else. Thank you so much for your views. Beginning with you, you look to be a border rider. Sebo Wasizotia. Omuvuzi wa boda. Olabidde ku helmet ne jacket. Kakati mbuli okwogera kwa president wakulabye kiibyo wagyemu gwe ng'omuvuzi wa boda boda.
Okwogera kwa president nakwagadde nnyo kuba yatulaze okwagala kw'alina eri eggwanga lye. Naye nze ng'omuvuzi wa boda boda nafunyemu obutasanyika n'omukulembeze bye yayogedde. Wansonga yatugambye ffe aba boda tugire tutika migugu. Emigugu yo terabika. Emigugu mitono. Ate nakuwa omugugu gwe, takuwa omugugu nga takumanyi, nga nawe tomanyi gy'abeera. Ekitegeeza sente ze tufuna mu migugu teziriiwo, ntono nnyo. Bw'oba ofunye omugugu ofuna akagugu kamu ka 1,000. Ate nga ababodaboda naffe tulina obuvunaanyizibwa, tulina famire. Era nze nnamu okutya kungi nnyo. Yagambye nti abaana b'amasomero aba P7 ne Senior 4 bagenda kuddamu mu bbanga lya mwezi gumu. Ate ffe mwezi gumu tujja kuba tetunatandika kukola. Ate nga naffe tulina abaana abali mu Senior 4 ne mu P7 baagala school fees, baagala sente za enable registration, byonna biri ku ffe. Ate ffe teyatadde emirimu gyaffe. Kati ffe tugenda kukola tutya.
Okay, mwagala balowoozeeko.
Twagala tulowoozeeko.
Okay, good enough. He has a presidential State of the Nation address on Thursday. Maybe he will make more pronouncements then. Sebo gambo chebwa.
Yerulisewo asibiirese
Okay, kati amanya go neki gwe kyogamba kwogera kwa president.
amanya nze kiweewayibula okwogera kwa pulezidenti kwabadde kulungi naye baganda baffe bano aba boodabooda bangi balina obwetaavu balina ebintu byebeetaaga nga bba abantu ate teyabalowoozezaako
Kati gwe nga gwe okola mulimu kira mu byoyegedde byonna bina gwe kiki wafunyeemu ng'ovudde ku babooda wanga babooda ayogeredde ababooda.
nga nze nyina takisi nyina n'emirimu emirala gye nkola naye nga nyina takisi nyina edduuka ne saaluuni n'ebirala nyina ebirala bingi bye nkola naye ebyo nze kati nga nze nasigala nti nsobola okuyingizaawo ku kasente akatonotono naye ate bannaffe bano be tujjamu sente abalina okutuyimirizaawo ffe mu mirimu gyaffe tebaabatadde ng'ate sente zibadde zikendedde mu bantu ezibadde zitambula mu bantu zikendedde kakati ekyo ndaba nga naye bannaffe abo yandibadde abaloboozaako netuba nga tusobola okutambulira awamu.
Webale nnyo ssebo. Kanfuneko ono ogamba otya ssebo? Masiki nimwogirekako.
Amanya n'eddoboozi yenze Kalule Robert era ndi muvuzi wa booda naye kwogera kwa pulezidenti Museveni teyalumiriddwa muntu wa wansi ono asookerwako owa booda kuba tasobola kukeera ku makya n'ogamba nti booda nsongezaayo buli kiseera nga woza omulaba ayongezaayo booda weka omuntu atya yatulagira tuweka ebitereke takisi yazigudde takisi ekitereke kyembadde ntwala owa takisi yagenda okukola ki kukitwala owa booda apangisa enju ayina famire ennyumba balandiroodi batubanja so teyazoogerako amazzi amasannyalaze ebyo byonna teyakola ki alyogerako abikomyawo yandibadde abisitopinga okitegeera ekirala tulina naffe abaana abasoma nabo kati tugenda kukola tutyawo baba boda
anti yagambye nti kino akikola kubanga ageza kulaba nga balwanyisa obulwadde kubanga banaddamu okusoma kati ate ensaasana y'obulwadde eyinza okweyongera ensonga lwaki bagambye nti amasomero gagira galindako
abaana ensaasanya y'obulwadde tetugigaana ensi nyingi zonna zibadde ziba zibikola nga zikola egundi eyo kubeera nti abaana mubeera waka naye nga balina facilities ze babawa emmere yalema kubanga ewaffe nze mbeera nansala tewatutukanga wadde akantu naaka bajja ne batuwandiika ne basaza n'ebikalamu ku nzigi nti
bagenda kuddamu okuleeta emmere ate
basazaako ebikalamu nti twafuna naye nga tewali n'ogwo yali afunye emmere nansala kati tulinjala tulumira mu mayumba okedde ku makya ovugayo ekitereke aguddewo takisi nti zikole kati tegeza ekitereke tojja kivuga.
Webale nnyo kanfuna asembayo ssebo amanya go naye kikyoteesa.
Amanya agange nze Kato Daniel Omugambwa okusinziira omukulembeze oyo yayogedde nze nina ebintu bye nategeddemu bye nafunyemu okwogera kwabadde
mu bufunze
mu kusooka naye ekizibu kye twazze ne tulaba mu kwogerako kwe kugamba nti aba boda basigale ku migugu kubanga mu Uganda tulina obuzibu bw'employment boda employing abantu abawera 3,000 bagenda kulyawa olw'okuba abantu balwadde nze nandibadde ngamba bateekeko omuntu omu nteesa bamusanitizinge bavuga oyo kubanga obubbi bugenda kweyongera boda zaali zatuyamba nga obubbi bwakenda kubanga omuntu ng'ali shuwa ajja kufunayo 5 omutwalo ogw'okulya ne kati abantu 3,000 ogamba nti basombe emigugu bagenda jijjawa.
Mwebale nnyo endowoozayo mwebale ddala mwebale nnyo abantu b'e Namuŋŋoona. These are the views from the people here in Namuŋŋoona along the Hoima Road. I hope those who speak to the president is also watching NTV, like Honorable Henry Mayiga, who speaks directly to the president, will be able to pass on the views from these people. This is Morning at NTV on FSW. You've got Stephen Mbide. I hand you back to Arnold Segawa.
Stephen Mbide, many thanks for that and putting the dear ambassador on the spot. Ambassador Mayiga, you've heard the people. Maybe your last remarks before maybe you pass on the message to His Excellency.
Well, the fact of the matter is that, of course, in my view, the government is on top of the things. And as far as fighting the pandemic is concerned. And of course, I want to take cognizance of the fact that people are definitely concerned about what's going on because, I mean, like those who are in business, they would want to see a situation that we go back to normalcy as quickly as possible so that they can make money. Which also builds the economy from which all of us actually benefit. So it is something that affects all of us. But you see, we are dealing with a situation which is not normal. It's abnormal, like the president has said. And therefore, if it is abnormal, it is better we get a little bit careful when it comes to easing the lockdown, because if we bump into things into the unknown, then of course it will be government to be blamed. Yeah, so the government has to be very careful as they ease this thing. It's painful, yes, I agree 100%. It has affected all of us. The plans that we had for the rest of the year are all gone. We have now to go back to the drawing boards. Just like the government itself, it has to go back to the drawing boards and then make sure that things fall into line. But I want to encourage Ugandans that yes, it's a difficult time, but we're going to get to a situation where we return to normalcy, and that will be good for everybody. It will be good for the government. It will be good for the country.
Many thanks, Ambassador. That was the Deputy Head of Mission to China, and our guest today, Henry Maiga, just walking us through the technicalities of the lockdown and giving us a more holistic spectrum of this particular pandemic that we have on our hands. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more Morning at NTV after this.